to motivate and encourage those who pursue aviation and adventure to fulfill their dreams and live enriched lives.
Hi and welcome to this controversial subject. What to do when your engine stops after you've taken off. You're at 500 feet, you have to make a quick decision, and hopefully you've trained for this. Hopefully you've trained and thought about this before you've taken off, because you're either going to have to land straight ahead, turn left, or turn right. Now that turn is going to be determined by the wind direction, isn't it? If the wind is straight down the runway, it doesn't matter which way you turn. But if the wind is from the left, do you turn into wind or do you turn away from the wind? I was talking to a couple of pilots on Saturday about this. The subject came up about what to do, and suddenly the penny dropped about if you turn left into wind, you have to make more turns, more angle of corrections, or I don't know how to put it, but you have to turn more. There's more turn radiuses, if you like, involved in order to get back to the runway, because don't forget, when you get to the runway, you're going to have to turn left again to correct for that sideways drift because of that wind. A quartering wind, 45 degrees across the runway is what we're dealing with. And because of all those turns, that means we're putting ourselves in a precarious position where we could end up in an incipient spin and at low speed, low level, and we don't have any room to recover. If you turn the other way, you don't have to make as sharper turns, or do you? Because obviously the wind is pushing us now away from the runway, but when we approach the runway to land, we won't have to make much of a turn to land because the wind is pushing us onto the runway, keeping us on that heading. We must fly with the wind direction in mind so that we don't have to so that we just land with the wind assistance pushing us onto the runway, and we just straighten before we land, obviously. So that could have some merit. Here's a diagram anyway, and some calculations that one of the GA pilots we were talking to on Saturday has sent me by email. He must have really thought about this, because he's suddenly gone, okay, hold on a minute. All of us, I think, have been trained rigorously by our instructors to turn left or to turn into wind. If there's a side wind, a crosswind, we turn into wind to land back to the runway. The wind will push us back to the runway. Turning the other way, the wind will push us away from the runway.
Okay, so let's look at this diagram that the GA pilot has supplied us. With a 10 knot 45 degree wind from the right hand side when we do a right turn to land back on the runway, 10 knots, vector is 7 knots. The aircraft speed at 65 knots, bank angle 45 degrees, radius of turn 115 meters, 180 degree arc length equals 360 meters. Time for 360 meters is 11 seconds. Effect of the wind is 7 knots times 11 seconds, which is 40 meters. Time for 45 degree turn is 3 seconds. Distance traveled is 82 meters. Time to runway 46 knots plus 7 knots divided by 108 meters is 4 seconds. Total time equals 11 seconds plus 3 seconds plus 4 seconds, which is 18 seconds. Sink is 720 feet per minute times 100 times 14 plus 600 feet per minute times 4. This equals 168 feet plus 40 feet is a height loss of 208 feet. With the other scenario of turning away from the wind, we've still got a 45 degree 10 knot wind, and we're going to try and return to the runway. Again, the aircraft speed is 65 knots, a bank angle of 45 degrees. Radius of turn 115 meters, 180 degree arc length equals 360 meters. Time for 360 meters is 11 seconds. Effective wind is 7 knots times 11 seconds is 40 meters. Time for 45 degree turn 3 seconds. Distance traveled 60 meters. Time to runway 46 knots minus 7 knots divided by 210 meters equals 10 seconds. Total time 11 seconds plus 3 seconds plus 10 seconds is 24 seconds. 45 degree bank increases wing loading by 20%, so we'll assume, and we have been assuming, a similar increase in sink rate. Normal sink rate is 600 feet per minute. During turn it's 720 feet per minute. So in a 24 second aircraft sink is 280 feet in scenario 2 compared to 208 feet in scenario 1 when we turned into wind. So that's the theory. In the next video we'll have a look at what really happens in real life and how everything affects us. There's one more thing we need to point out though. When we're turning into wind, to recorrect our alignment for runway for landing, we have to do another turn, and that will normally be a turn greater than the axis of the runway if we're in a microlight with our rudder anyway, which means we've got another turn happening there. And the more turns we do, the more the chance of incipient spins is likely to occur, so there's a danger element with that. If we turn with the wind, then our correction to turn on the runway is almost negligible. We don't have to make as much of an adjustment when we turn back to the runway center line, and that means our turns are reduced and our risk of a spin is also reduced. Very important for aircraft without rudders, because it's easy to make that adjustment with a rudder, from my experience anyway, which is limited.
These calculations, this diagram and pictures and everything that he's drawn, indicate what he thinks mathematically. So what we're going to do though, I'm going to take my aircraft up. It does about 65 knots on climb out, and we're going to climb to 500 feet, and we're going to turn into the wind. And 500 feet, power off, idle only. I'm not going to turn it off. Yeah, I'm not quite that adventurous. Anyway, we're going to turn into wind and we're going to see if we can land back at the runway. Now the idea is, yes, we'll probably have enough altitude. I'm building in 500 feet just for safety. It's not about whether or not we can get back to the runway. It's about how high, what altitude are we at when we get back to the runway. When we do that example, or we do the right turn example away from the wind. Let's see which one ends up the highest over the runway, which one is easiest, which one is the most difficult. That will be in the next video when I still haven't done it. I don't know. Right now, I am totally at a loss, but I would have always said, as many of us probably would, to turn left, turn into the wind, and then get blown back to the runway, because otherwise you're going to have a big deal of effort trying to get back to the runway if you're on the downwind side of the runway. So let's go and try this out in an upcoming video. In the meantime, leave your comments, be constructive, tell us what you think, what have you experienced, what have you been told, what have you been trained to do. Okay, so we'll see you then, and we'll give it a go, and we'll see what the results are. I'll also be graphing all of this, hopefully if it works. We'll use the GPS to show the altitudes and the the track that I take as I come back around to land. So we'll be able to see that graphically and what actually happened on the GPS at different angles and everything. Alright, so until then, send us your comments, tell us what you think. Okay, bye for now.